Want to hop back into this conversation we were having about spring ball and quarterbacks and all this, because I had a thought about the quarterback position as well, and I was wondering, because you keep asking this question, are we gonna be okay if Dylan's not the guy? Game one, right? August 31st, they roll out. It's not Dylan for whatever reason. Do you think the reaction is different if it's Daniel Kaelin versus if it's Heinrich Harburg?
Yes, but probably not for the reason you think.
Okay, go ahead.
I think and make no mistake about it, I think Raiola is clearly the leader
Yes.
right now.
Yeah.
If I think Nebraska staff had their way.
Mhm.
Okay. I think.
Their lives are
said clear-
easier if he makes him clear that he's the starter,
Yes.
right?
Yes. That's a better way to say it.
Yeah.
That's a better way to say it. But I think the fans would be willing, I think, to be patient for a game or two or whatever, the way that the schedule's going to break. If it's Harburg and it's like, okay, he's going to he's we're going to ease into this.
Mm-hmm.
But knowing it's coming, because I think Harburg would take the moving on and the place holding a little bit better as an older, more experienced guy, even though he's only got 8 starts.
And a guy that maybe has other options in terms of positionality.
That's the thing, right?
Okay.
He can his career, he can still help you win games in other places, even though they're like, oh, we've seen this before.
Mm-hmm.
I think if it were DK, and this isn't not people have a hard time hearing, but so let me explain this slow. This is not the opinion of what I think their talent level is. This is what I feel the perception would be. The perception would be if he's beaten out by another freshman, somebody of the same age, then they won't give credit to the guy that beat him out. They will say that he's not as good as he was made out to be. That's what I think the difference would be.
So I agree with the logic. I landed in a different place.
Most people would, but I mean, it's just this. That's
I
just
get what you're saying.
That's just my opinion.
I get what you're saying for sure.
But again, that's what I would think of as a coach. It's not.
Yeah,
you know what I mean.
It's easier.
I'm not a fan
to explain. I mean, you are a fan.
I am a fan.
Think like a fan.
Yeah, I just don't think. Yeah,
there's a difference.
Yeah,
right.
100%.
You can put the different hats on. I think
I'm always going to think like a coach.
Yeah, and I think people.
Even when it's my own family.
Yeah,
I did it in basketball at Millard North. I did it.
Yeah.
I'm always gonna think like a coach.
So I arrived at a different conclusion using mostly the same mostly the same thinking, right? Because I agree that the fan base is going to look at what Dylan didn't do versus what the other guy did do, right? Like, I don't think whether it's Harburg,
it's usually the case,
whether it's Kaelin, whatever, right? It's going to be looked at as like, oh, is Dylan not as good as we thought he was? Did he do something wrong? Is he not ready to go the way he thought he was? Where I think because of what we saw last year with Harburg, it would be worse because we feel like we know what Harburg is, right? You sit there and you go, okay, I saw this movie already. I have no interest in a repeat viewing. I know what Harburg is, even if he's gotten better, right? Which we would like to think that he has, right?
Well, there's no question he will.
Good coaching, more reps, all of this stuff, right? Like, Heinrich Harburg probably going to be a better quarterback this year than he was last year. I don't think that's a hot take. But instead of looking at that, we're going to look at, we know what we saw from Harburg. We have to assume, quote unquote, we have to assume that if this is what Harburg is, and we're going off of last year, and he gets to start over both Kaelin and Raiola, but specifically Raiola, then it's a disaster on our hands with Raiola. Where I think if you've got two guys that are totally unknowns with Kaelin and Raiola, you can talk yourself into Kaelin just being ahead for now.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't.
Does that make sense? Does it make sense how people would get there?
Yes, it doesn't make sense for me.
Yeah, though. It's not how you would approach it.
So,
but I think from a fan standpoint, I think it'd be easier to swallow and you already said you're not thinking about it as a fan, and that's fine. I think from a fan standpoint, it's easier to swallow if DK gets the nod over Raiola than if it were Heidenkarberg.
So the one thing I think that's a little, what we're afraid, we're not, we got to say the quiet part out loud.
Mm-hmm.
There are a lot of people that watched Bellevue West the last couple of years and will have separated Elite 11 from actual games. They're like, listen, this is a guy that was 14-8. People were going to talk about what he didn't have, his offensive. Like, he gets a lot of the, he didn't have this, he didn't have that. This guy was hurt. Okay. And some of that may be true, but where I'm landing this is some people, especially locally, feel like they've seen so much of him. They have their mind made up.
Sure.
He's either this or he's that, whatever that is, right? And we're not willing to introduce development or getting better
or better coaching,
even though that's all we want from this staff.
Yeah.
Hey, just develop guys. But we're not willing to do that.
Like maybe Glenn Thomas comes in and he really is a quarterback, like a really good quarterback coach, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what he does for a living. He was doing it at the NFL level. Like maybe he really is that good at what he does.
Yeah, because I mean, like if we're standing out here in this parking lot and you watch him spin the ball, he can spin it as well as anyone.
With anybody, right?
Okay, that's safe. So whatever has to happen where we get to see that on the field.
That translates to actual gameplay.
That there's still time for that to happen.
And there's something there to work with, right?
Yeah. So I guess it's not an indictment on his talent. I'm talking to people on how they're viewing this quarterback thing. Okay. It's not my opinion. This is how we're going to look at this because people locally have seen so much, they will react a certain way if this happens because we're very particular. We're very particular about when we want to use. It's like selective objectivity, if that even makes sense. We're willing to be objective until it doesn't fit what I think I already know.
Yeah. Well, it's the confirmation bias thing I talked about earlier.
But it doesn't. See, there's very few that are qualified enough to stand on that business, though.
100%. Right? I also think that there's the vast majority of Nebraska football fans probably did not watch Daniel Kaelin in high school. The vast majority. Right?
I'm with you.
There's a lot of people that have.
Or Dylan, for that matter.
Yes.
Not real games.
No, for sure. Either they saw highlights and the Polynesian Bowl, or that's it.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is that just proves that's we know we think we know too much.
Yeah, and we know almost nothing at all.
And so we're going to critique this the whole way through. And do you know who rolls their eyes the most?
Coaches.
The coaches.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, here we go. Like just let them. Let this thing play out. Just. Because I don't know if you're following recruiting, still making 2025 offers, still making 2026. Like this thing's going to go on.
Yeah, regardless.
No
matter what happens.
So like the arriving at predetermined thought processes is I'm trying to keep that from getting a thing. Because do we fully trust? Do we only partially trust?
Well, that's what it comes back to, right? This conversation of how much do we trust Rule, right? Because you brought this up a couple weeks ago. It's even more true now, right? Because Rule has taken on an even larger
presence
in the athletic department.
You better trust him.
Because of the events that have happened. It sort of seems like he hired the new athletic director. I don't know if maybe I'm putting too fine a point on it. That kind of seems like he hired the new athletic director. So he's got a really outsized presence in this athletic department. And I used this analogy last week. A monarchy is great as long as you have a good king, right? If Rule's a good king, if he has good judgment, if he makes good decisions, having him be the head of your monarchy is terrific. If all of a sudden, maybe his judgment isn't as clear as we'd like it to be, maybe some of the decisions don't work out the way we want them to be, all of a sudden we want a democracy, right? That's how things tend to work. Because he's in a position where he could have virtually unchecked power in this athletic department.
Keep going.
Right?
Well, yeah.
And unchecked power is really dangerous because you are counting on one individual to be essentially infallible, whether it's in their actual decisions or at least in their process of making those decisions.
I said that on Benning Bites one episode. I was just like, I'm just praying for good discernment, right? Just good protection,
which you've said all along,
and good stewardship.
Which you've said all along, discernment may be his best quality.
Yep.
So we might be okay here.
But he's his own barometer.
Yes.
I don't know enough about like his peers.
We also don't know enough about outside of football stuff. Right?
Yeah.
We think he has really good discernment with people and with coaches and with players and all this other stuff.
Like there's a couple of guys I would love, Sean, I talk about Sean Patton. Like he's one of those guys I would just like to, the more time I would spend around him, I feel like the more I would clean up, and he's got just enough good balance because he's got some real grinders, like Ryan Callahan or, Vince Ginta or Keith Williams, like these guys, the behind the scene guys that are kind of like that do the dirty, they do the execution of the visions.
Yeah, they're the scaffolding.
That's pretty good. That I love. Like those three. Like I like those guys a ton.
They're the rebar that everything is built on top of.
And I think they'll work hard. They work hard.
I make that assumption about anybody that works for Rule because it seems like he's made that pretty clear that if you're not a grinder, you're not going to fit here.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I assume everybody that works for him now is a super hard worker.
So the quarterback thing is just one of a few pieces because we can't ever decide which way we want it. If it's CJ Stroud, it's because he has good players, right? If it's Justin Fields, oh, look who he was throwing to, right? But if it's JJ McCarthy, it's, I don't know. I mean, could anybody have done it?
Right.
He won 12. So it's like, well, which is it? Do we want a guy that's supremely talented that's playing with other good players or do we want a guy that can elevate the play of those
all by himself?
Yeah, we don't even know. So, and all I'm trying to do is alleviate headaches at the end.
And we're talking about Caleb Williams versus Justin Fields, or Caleb Williams versus CJ Stroud, right?
We just heard the kind of the low key, subtle. Well, it actually wasn't very subtle. I mean, when Sam said Bo Nix, right, like he all but questioned. I think it sounded like he all but questioned Bo Nix's talent because he played with a lot of good players. He's going to get a lot of those guys in the NFL too.
But guess what? None of those guys are any better than the players that Michael Penix played with, at least a receiver, right?
Yeah, with the Dunes. Yeah, he had a couple.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, he had three, actually.
He had three really good receivers. He had a good running back that was banged up in the national championship game. And he had what was awarded the best offensive line in the country.
I just don't know why we can't.
You know what I mean?
Why we don't know how to to take in information about quarterback play. We want it to be like this.
Can I be honest with you? There's too many variables. People.
So if that's the case, then why don't we just chill?
Because that's not how people are wired. People have an opinion about everything.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. People have an opinion about everything. And when there's too many variables, we try and simplify it.
There's a lot of schools that win a lot of games that don't have fantastic quarterback play that I would like to be. And I can say that without saying I don't want fantastic quarterback play.
Yeah. I mean, Michigan's a great example, right?
Like, wouldn't it be nice while you're waiting for your quarterback to develop that you're so good in other areas
that you can win anyway?
That you can buy yourself some time.
That you can get, like, what I would love to happen
is Nebraska be elite defensively and be elite on special teams to give yourself some cushion. That'd be awesome.
And have a functional running game and it doesn't have to be. And I'd prefer
we don't look at running backs that way. Like,
no.
So this is what we would do. If Ramir Johnson, he won't because he's not an every down back, but
call it Emma Johnson. He might be an every down back, maybe.
No, let's say Gabe Irvin won the job at running back.
Okay.
We would immediately have an opinion about Dowdell.
Sure. Yeah, we do it everywhere.
We don't treat quarterbacks the same way, though.
Well, yeah, we do. If Daniel Kaelin wins the job, we'll immediately have an opinion on Dylan Raiola.
This is what I'm only because of the way that I just framed the discussion. If you think about it the way that I'm trying to explain that it could happen, that's how all the other positions happen. It's just that when it's quarterback, we make these grand indictments about talent level. If it's, let's say, when LP won the job, it wasn't that we were bad. It was that he was really good.
He was the best of a good bunch.
Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
Why come quarterbacks can't be that way?
Part of it, I think, right.
No,
it's fair. It's a fair question. It is. I think part of it right now is also that Nebraska hasn't been winning. And so we assume something about the overall talent level of the program.
That's fair.
And
I'll at least entertain that.
Right. So I think that, and this is me processing this real time. I think that part of it is we assume, since Nebraska's not winning very much, that if you can't even win a job for this team, then there's something wrong with you.
But has this staff ever talked about needing to be dynamic at quarterback?
They talked a little bit last year about wanting the quarterback run game to be an
Have
element.
They ever talked about the output, what they need?
No.
Okay.
Not about output.
Right. We do, though.
Yes. Because I think we watch and we say, hey, all the teams that win championships have really good quarterback play.
So what if we don't like J.J. McCarthy?
No, but he's also the outlier in the last handful of years. He's the most of an outlier in the last handful of years. Everybody else, your Bryce Youngs, your Trevor Lawrences, all those guys were hugely productive in college. J.J. McCarthy is kind of the outlier. Michigan in general, the way they played, is the outlier in our most recent national champions.
Interesting.
Now, even Stetson Bennett, who I don't love as a talent.
Because they just beat a team with a quarterback
they beat
really good, and they have a lot of skill.
They beat their brains in.
Okay.
They beat everybody's brains in.
But,
right?
Yeah.
We look at even like a Stetson Bennett, who talent-wise isn't in the same category as those first-round guys.
So he's the guy that I was talking about when I said you have to be able to command a huddle.
But hugely productive.
Listen, you have to be able to command the huddle.
And he obviously did, right?
Those guys would do – he was unquestionably the backbone of that offense.
100%.
With all those other guys that were getting drafted.
100%.
So
and a bunch of 4- and 5-star quarterbacks that couldn't beat him out for a job.
We undersell it. So he's either a lot better than we thought, or he's either the most amazingly emotionally gifted leader of the last 15 years in the SEC.
And maybe a little bit of both. I mean, maybe it's a little bit of both, right? Yeah, maybe we look at his stature and we go, oh, he can't be that good, which is what I do. I'll admit that. And maybe he's also one of the best leaders the SEC or college football scene in a decade.
I just think
both of those things might be true.
I just think we undersell it.
You're probably right, but it's we undersell everything that we can't see.
Well, and I'm not holding 95% of the public accountable to it, because you don't know. Unless you see Anthony Rizak command the huddle, you have no idea how important that is. Unless you see T. Fraze command the huddle, you have no idea how important that is. Unless you see a guy that is ultra talented and can hit any spot on a football field throwing a ball, not be able to command the huddle like Kerry Collins, you don't know how important that is. So all these things have shaped my thought process, and I want everybody to think like that, but I just know it's not. Number one, it's way too myopic. It makes zero sense, but it's one of the things that I could always gravitate towards. Why I'm no fun to talk about these conversations with, because
well, here's the other problem.
Dylan could be a fantastic kid and a fantastic talent, and he may not be ready to lead
to do what he's
an offensive line that's going to have more starts than any other offensive line in the conference. More starts than any other offensive line in the conference, and the 18-year-old is going to have to command that huddle. It's not an indictment.
No. It would take an incredibly special and mature 18-year-old for that to be feasible.
And then the staff has to look at that and say, okay, we're going to turn this over to you. This is your team. Go. And he's the youngest guy out there.
Now,
that's not a talent thing. That's sometimes you just need time.
Yeah, it's a maturity thing. It's a growth thing.
Now, if he's ready,
if he's that dude already, you got something.
Then you've got something. So we just don't know.
But you also have this situation on the flip side of the coin that you described earlier, that maybe you can put him out there and let everybody else lead if he's got the mentality to be able to do that, right? To be able to defer a little bit while he learns. And I think that's probably the more likely scenario, at least early, right? you give them these little opportunities to lead or whatever, but the offensive line, who's maybe the unit with the fewest questions on that side of the ball.
All right. So, for example, right, I'm Harburg. We're in the huddle. Hey, jump right, Y rabbit, Z stick, fox trot on one. You good? You good? Ready? Break. Okay. You break the huddle, offensive line, whatever. Kaelin comes in. Hey, let's go fox right. Y rabbit. Finish the play, right? The next guy comes in. Hey, let's go fox right. Hey, do you want Y rabbit, right? You check. See, that's part of commanding the huddle, because it's not so much about what you don't know. It's more about what those other guys, how they feel confident that regardless of what they do, that you still got it. Right? Like that's part of the allure of playing championship caliber football. But we don't talk about that when we talk about Elite 11s or Polynesian Bowls or only 8 career starts or coming out of Kearney Catholic or wherever, that I think is so paramount in being a good football team, because that's what happens in nut cutting time. It's not when it's 14-0 in the first quarter. It's what happens at 3rd and 6 with 4 minutes to go, and you need a 4-minute drive.
What happens when you're.
So those things take time.
It's what happens when you're inside the 5-yard line multiple times with a chance to win games this season and can't get it done.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what you're talking about here. Now, the other part of that is, I think Nebraska, Coach Rule specifically, would love to be in a position where they don't have to rely on a quarterback.
I think ideally that's what he would want.
I think he wants to be able to win 8 or 9 games a year with super average quarterback play.
And then get the important 1 or 2 because your quarterback's really good?
Yes.
Yeah, I agree with you.
You don't want to be a USC situation where you win 8 or 9 because your quarterback's otherworldly.
I completely agree with you.
I think you want to win 8 or 9 because you're a really damn good football team.
And I think he'd take it too, even if game to game. Just give me 4 or 5 plays that you make,
100%,
and we'll be good the rest of the way.
We're going to take care of it 80% of the time.
Yep.
20% of the time, I need you to make a play.
I think that's what they want.
We got more Hurrdat Sports Radio coming up next.